Indiana Fever are getting destroyed.
With the 10th pick in the 2026 WNBA draft, the Indiana Fever select Raven Johnson.
People are furious.
Fire the front office. Y'all some straight up BS.
Raven Johnson will be a cancer in the locker room.
What if Caitlin Clark gets injured?
CC needs to get the hell out of Indiana.
This might be the moment everything starts falling apart. Because what just happened with Indiana Fever? Nobody saw it coming. And now, fans are calling it one of the most confusing and possibly most dangerous decisions of the entire WNBA draft. Because out of nowhere, with the 10th pick, the Fever selected Raven Johnson. And the reaction? Immediate chaos. We're not talking mild criticism. We're talking full-blown outrage. Fans yelling, "Fire the front office." What are they doing to Caitlin Clark? This makes zero sense. And honestly, when you look at it closely, it really doesn't. Because let's be real for a second. When you have a generational superstar like Caitlin Clark, every single move you make is supposed to do one thing: help her win, protect her, build around her. But this move, now fans are saying it does the exact opposite. Because instead of adding size, instead of adding shooting, instead of fixing the team's biggest weaknesses, they added another guard. And not just any guard. A player who already has history tied to Caitlin Clark. A player connected to controversy. A player some fans are literally calling a locker room problem waiting to happen. Now here's where things get even worse. Because this isn't just about basketball anymore. This is about timing. This is about tension. This is about a move that feels like it's going directly against your biggest star. And now people are asking one question over and over again. Are the Fever actually trying to sabotage Caitlin Clark? Because if you look at everything together, the roster, the fit, the history, it starts to feel less like a mistake and more like something much bigger. And trust me, what we're about to break down next, it makes this decision look even worse than it already does. To really understand why this move has people losing their minds right now, you have to understand one thing first. This isn't just about a draft pick. This is about Caitlin Clark. Because the moment she entered the WNBA, everything changed. The attention, the ratings, the pressure, the expectations. She didn't just join the league, she became the face of it. And when you have a player like that, every decision your organization makes gets magnified, judged, analyzed from every possible angle. And that's exactly what's happening right now with the Indiana Fever. Because from the outside, this team should be doing one thing: building everything around Caitlin Clark, spacing the floor for her, adding size to protect her, giving her teammates that elevate her strengths. That's how you build around a generational talent. But here's where the problem starts. Because if you look at the Fever's roster moves recently, something feels off. Not completely wrong, but definitely not aligned. Because instead of clearly building around Caitlin, it feels like they're building beside her. And that difference? It's huge. Now let's talk about the roster situation, because this is where fans are getting frustrated. The Fever already have guards, ball handlers, players who need touches, players who need minutes. So when the draft came around, most people expected one thing: size, shooting, front court strength. Something that balances the team. Something that complements Caitlin's play style. But instead, they went in the exact opposite direction. They drafted Raven Johnson, another guard, another ball handler, another player competing for the same space on the floor. And instantly, the questions started. Because from a basketball standpoint alone, it doesn't add up. Where does she fit? Who loses minutes? Who handles the ball? Because one thing is clear: the ball belongs in Caitlin Clark's hands. That's where she's most dangerous. That's where she changes games. So bringing in another player who also needs the ball to be effective, that creates tension. Now here's where things get even more complicated. Because this isn't just about positions. It's about history. Because if you go back to the NCAA, there's already a moment that connects Caitlin Clark and Raven Johnson. A moment fans haven't forgotten. That viral clip. The one where Caitlin waved her off, dared her to shoot, and the internet exploded. That wasn't just a play. That became a narrative, a rivalry moment, a symbol of tension between two players. And now, those same two players are on the same team. Think about that. Because chemistry in basketball, it's not automatic, especially when there's history, especially when there's outside noise, especially when fans are already divided before the season even starts. And that's exactly what's happening here. Because this situation isn't neutral. Fans already have opinions. Strong ones. Now let's talk about the controversy. Because this is where things get serious. Just weeks before the draft, Raven Johnson made comments about online harassment connected to Caitlin Clark fans. She talked about being bullied, being called names, even mentioned racial slurs. Now, whether those claims are true or exaggerated isn't even the main issue here. The issue is perception, because fans didn't forget that. And now, the Fever have brought that same player into the same locker room as Caitlin Clark. And that's where the tension comes from. Because from the fan perspective, this isn't just a basketball move. This is bringing controversy directly into your superstar's environment. And that feels risky. Very risky. Now here's where the situation starts to feel even bigger. Because this isn't just about one player. This is about a pattern. Because when fans look at the Fever's moves recently, they don't see a clear direction. They don't see a focused strategy. They see confusion. They see randomness. And when you combine that with this draft pick, it raises serious questions. Because building around a superstar isn't optional. It's required. And right now, fans don't feel like that's happening. Instead, they're starting to ask something much more dangerous. Are the Fever actually building without Caitlin Clark in mind? And that question? It changes everything. Because once fans start believing that, every move gets viewed differently. Every decision gets questioned. Every mistake feels bigger than it actually is. And right now, that's exactly where things are heading. Because this isn't just about talent, it's about trust. Trust between the team and the fans. Trust between the front office and their superstar. Trust that the organization knows what it's doing. And right now, that trust is starting to crack. Because when a move like this happens, and it doesn't make sense on the surface, people don't assume it's just a mistake. They assume there's something else going on, something they're not seeing. And that's where things get dangerous. Because once that narrative starts, it spreads fast. And right now, it's spreading everywhere. Because this isn't just a draft pick anymore. This is a statement. Whether the Fever meant it to be or not. And the problem is, nobody fully understands what that statement is. Yet. And trust me, what comes next? That's where things really start to spiral. And this is where everything goes from confusing to straight up explosive. And because the moment the Indiana Fever announced the pick, everything broke. Not slowly, not quietly. Instantly. Because the reaction wasn't just disappointment. It was anger. Real anger. Fans flooding timelines with one message. What are they doing to Caitlin Clark? And if you look at the reactions closely, they all point to the same fear. This move doesn't just not help Caitlin. It might actually hurt her. Now let's break down why this exploded so fast. Because it's not just about Raven Johnson as a player. It's about what she represents in this situation. Because the moment her name was called, fans didn't think, solid defender. They didn't think, good role player. They thought, why her? And that question, it triggered everything. Because out of all the players available, all the options that could have filled real needs, the Fever chose the one player tied to controversy involving Caitlyn. And that's where the conflict really begins. Because now this isn't just a roster decision. This feels personal. Now let's talk about the first big twist. Because at first people thought this was just a bad basketball move. Bad fit, wrong position, poor roster construction. But then, the narrative shifted. Because fans started connecting dots. They started looking at the timing, looking at recent comments, looking at the history between Raven Johnson and Caitlyn Clark. And suddenly, this didn't feel accidental anymore. It started feeling intentional. Because think about it. You already have multiple guards. You already lack size. You already need shooting. And instead of fixing any of those issues, you draft another 5'9" guard. Who doesn't solve your biggest problems? That doesn't look like strategy. That looks like something else. And that's when the word started spreading. Sabotage. Now, is that extreme? Yes, but when fans don't understand a move, they don't assume logic. They assume something deeper. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. Now here's where things get even more intense. Because while fans were already upset about the basketball side, the off-court tension made it worse. Way worse. Because just weeks before this draft, Raven Johnson made comments about Caitlyn Clark fans, linking them to harassment and racial abuse. And that moment, it stuck. Fans didn't forget it. They didn't move on from it. And now, the Fever just brought that same player into the same locker room as the same superstar connected to that situation. That's not neutral. That's loaded. And that's why people are calling this a disaster waiting to happen. Because now the concern isn't just about basketball fit. It's about chemistry, trust, energy inside the locker room. Now imagine this scenario. You're Caitlyn Clark. You're the face of the league. The entire team is supposed to be built around you. And then suddenly, a player with controversy tied to your fan base, a player connected to a moment that went viral, gets drafted onto your team. That creates pressure, whether you admit it or not. Now here's the second twist. And this one? It changes how people see everything. Because some fans aren't just saying this is a bad move. They're saying this is part of a pattern. So a pattern of decisions that don't fully support Caitlyn. Because when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, it doesn't feel like everything is being built around her strengths. It feels like pieces are being added randomly. Or worse, added in a way that limits her. Because let's be real, Caitlyn Clark thrives when she has the ball. She has spacing. She has shooters around her. That's when she's unstoppable. But what happens when you add more ball handlers, more players needing touches, more competition for minutes? That changes everything. Because now, instead of maximizing her strengths, you're diluting them. And that's exactly what fans are afraid of. Now let's talk about the locker room situation. Because this is where things could really spiral. Because talent doesn't win games alone. Chemistry does. Trust does. And right now, fans are questioning both. Because what happens if Raven Johnson doesn't mesh with Caitlyn? There's tension over roles. There's frustration over touches. That doesn't stay hidden. Especially not with this level of attention. Because every game Caitlyn plays is watched, analyzed, clipped, viral within minutes. So if something feels off, everyone will see it. And once that happens, the narrative explodes again. Now here's the part that makes this even more dangerous. Because this isn't just about one season. This is about the future. Because fans are now asking a question that every organization fears. How long before Caitlyn Clark gets tired of this? Because superstars don't stay in situations where the roster doesn't make sense. The team isn't aligned. The organization isn't clearly building around them. And if that feeling starts to grow, that's when things get serious. Because if Caitlyn ever decides, this isn't the place for me, that changes everything. not just for the Fever, but for the entire WNBA. Now here's the scary part. Because this situation, it hasn't even fully started yet. Training camp hasn't begun. Games haven't been played. Rotations haven't been tested. But the tension, already here. The division, already happening. The narrative, already set. And once narratives like this lock in, they're hard to change. Because even if things go right, fans will still be watching for signs of something going wrong. Every missed pass, every frustrated reaction, every moment of miscommunication gets amplified. Now here's the final piece of this conflict. Because despite all the backlash, there is one scenario where this could work. If Raven Johnson fully buys into her role, if she focuses on defense, if she compliments Caitlin instead of competing with her, then yes, this could quiet the noise. But let's be honest, that's a big if, because right now, the perception is already set, and perception is one of the hardest things to change in sports. So now we're left with one reality. The Fever didn't just draft a player, they ignited a situation. One that could either work out and prove everyone wrong, or completely blow up in their face. And if it's the second one, then this won't just be a bad pick. It'll be the moment everything started falling apart. And trust me, what happens next? It only makes this situation even more intense. And just when it felt like the backlash couldn't get any louder, it did. Because the moment people stopped reacting emotionally and started actually breaking this move down, that's when things got even worse for the Indiana Fever. Because now, it wasn't just fans yelling online. It was people analyzing the situation like a full investigation. And the deeper they went, the more dangerous this decision started to look. Because let's strip away the emotions for a second and just focus on basketball. The Fever needed size, shooting, floor spacing, front court strength. That's not opinion, that's fact. But what did they do instead? They drafted another 5'9" guard, Raven Johnson, a defensive player, limited offensively, not a proven shooter, and most importantly, not solving any of the team's biggest problems. And that's when the narrative shifted again. Because now people weren't just confused, they were concerned. Because this doesn't just look like a bad move, it looks like a move with no clear plan. And when a team has no clear plan, that's when things fall apart. Now here's where the shocking reveal hits. Because as analysts and fans kept digging, another realization started spreading. And this one, it changes everything. Because it's not just about this pick, it's about a pattern. Look at the previous draft. Look at the roster construction. Look at how the team is being built. And suddenly, it doesn't feel like everything is centered around Caitlin Clark. It feels like she's just part of the system, not the system itself. And that's a huge problem. Because generational players, you don't build around them halfway. You build everything around them. But right now, that's not what it looks like. Now let's talk about something even more uncomfortable. Because this is where things get really serious. Because fans are now asking, are the Fever preparing for a future without Caitlin Clark? Now that might sound extreme, but when you look at the moves, it starts to make people think. Because multiple guards added ball handling responsibilities spread out. Less emphasis on Caitlin being the center that creates a weird picture. A picture where the team could function without fully depending on her. And that's the opposite of what you expect. Because when you have a player like Caitlin Clark, you don't reduce her role, you maximize it. So why does it feel like the opposite is happening? And that question, it's what's making this situation explode. Now let's bring the locker room back into this, because this is where everything could go from bad to catastrophic. Because right now, the pressure hasn't even started yet. No games played, no real competition, no real stress. But the narrative? Already toxic. Because you now have a generational superstar, a controversial new teammate, a fan base already divided. That's not a normal situation. That's a pressure cooker. And pressure cookers, they either create something strong or they explode. Now imagine the worst-case scenario. The team struggles early, the offense looks messy, Caitlyn doesn't get the ball in key moments. There's visible frustration on the court. What happens then? It goes viral, immediately. Because this isn't a normal team. This is the most watched team in the league. Every game is under a microscope. Every mistake gets clipped. Every reaction gets analyzed. So if something feels off, the entire league will see it. And once that happens, the narrative becomes reality. Now here's where the situation becomes even more dangerous. Because once fans start believing something, they don't let it go. And right now, fans believe this move is wrong. They believe it doesn't help Caitlyn. They believe it could hurt the team. And that belief, it's already locked in. Now here's the final layer that makes this even bigger. Because this isn't just about Indiana. This is about the WNBA. Because let's be honest, Caitlin Clark is the biggest draw in women's basketball right now. She's bringing new fans higher ratings, more attention than ever. So if the Fever fail to build around her properly, that's not just a team problem. That's a league problem. Because you don't get players like this often. And when you do, you don't waste that opportunity. But right now, fans feel like that's exactly what's happening. Now here's the part that makes this feel unfinished. Because despite all the backlash, all the criticism, all the questions, there is still one possibility left. That this actually works. That Raven Johnson embraces her role. That she focuses on defense. That she compliments Caitlyn instead of competing with her. And if that happens, everything changes. The narrative flips. The criticism fades. The move looks smart instead of reckless. But let's be honest, that's a big risk. Because right now, everything is stacked against that outcome. The perception, the history, the fit, the pressure, all of it. So now we're left with one reality. The Fever didn't just make a draft pick. They made a gamble. And not a small one. A massive one. Because if this works, they look like geniuses. But if it doesn't, this won't just be a bad decision. This will be remembered as the moment. Everything started falling apart. And trust me, what comes next? It might decide everything. At this point, this isn't just backlash anymore. This is a full-on meltdown across the entire WNBA community. Because the moment the Indiana Fever made that pick, the internet didn't just react. It exploded. We're talking fans, analysts, commentators. Everyone weighing in at the same time. And the reactions? They were brutal. Because this wasn't just disagreement. This was frustration turning into anger. Comments like, "Fire the front office. This team has no direction. They're ruining Caitlin Clark." Flooded every platform within minutes. And that kind of reaction? It doesn't come from one bad pick alone. It comes from something deeper, something that's been building. Now let's break down the sides, because the fan base is completely split. On one side, you have people defending the move. And their argument is simple. Raven Johnson brings defense. She adds toughness. She doesn't need to score to impact the game. And to be fair, that's not wrong. Because every team needs players who can defend, hustle, and bring energy. But here's the problem. The other side is way louder and way more emotional. Because they're not just looking at what Raven Johnson can do, they're looking at what the team needs. And in their eyes, this move solves nothing. No shooting, no size, no spacing, no protection for Caitlyn. And that's why the reaction is so intense. Because fans feel like this move ignored the most obvious problems. Now here's where things get even more heated. Because this isn't just about basketball anymore. This is about trust. Because fans are now questioning the leadership of the organization, the decision-making, the vision, everything. Because when a move doesn't make sense, people don't assume logic. They assume confusion. Or worse, incompetence. And right now, that's exactly what's being said. Now let's talk about the media, because this is where things go to another level. Because the moment the mainstream sports media locks onto this story, it's over. Because now it's not just fans talking. It's headlines, debates, segments breaking this down from every angle. And trust me, that's coming. Because this situation has everything. A generational superstar, a controversial teammate, a questionable front office decision, a divided fan base. That's not just news. That's a storyline. And the media loves storylines like this. Now here's the part that makes everything even more intense. The locker room speculation. Because even though nothing has happened yet, fans are already imagining worst-case scenarios. They're asking, what if Raven doesn't pass to Caitlyn? What if there's tension from day one? What if the chemistry is off? And those questions, they're dangerous, because even if none of that happens, the expectation is already there, which means people will look for it. Every missed pass, suspicious, every bad possession, questioned, every moment of frustration, blown out of proportion. And that's how narratives grow. Now let's bring Raven Johnson into this, because this isn't easy for her either, because she's not just entering the league as a rookie. She's entering as a controversial figure. Before she even plays a game, half the fan base is already against her. And that kind of pressure? It's real. Because now she's not just trying to prove herself as a player. She's trying to prove she belongs in this situation. And that's a tough position for anyone. Now here's the final layer of the reaction. Because this is where things get serious. The Caitlyn Clark exit narrative. Because fans are now openly saying she needs to leave. This team doesn't deserve her. They're going to push her out. Now, is that extreme? Yes. But once that idea enters the conversation, it doesn't go away. Because superstars leaving bad situations? That's not new. It happens all the time. And fans know that. So now, every move the Fever make gets judged through that lens. Does this help Caitlyn stay? Or does this push her away? And right now, fans believe it's the second one. Now here's the reality. Because despite all the chaos, all the reactions, all the criticism, there is still one truth. Nothing has actually happened yet. No games played, no chemistry tested, no real results. Which means everything we're seeing right now is based on perception. And perception can change. But here's the problem. It doesn't change easily, because once fans lock into a belief, it takes a lot to shift it. And right now, that belief is clear. This move doesn't make sense. And it could hurt the team. Now the only question left is, will the Fever prove everyone wrong? Or will this backlash turn into something much bigger? Because if it's the second one, then what we're seeing right now is just the beginning. And just when it feels like we've seen every reaction, every take, every possible angle, there's one final realization that's starting to hit people. And this one? It changes everything. Because what if this wasn't just a bad draft decision? What if this was something much bigger? Something that goes beyond just Indiana Fever and one rookie pick. Because when you step back and look at the full picture, the roster moves, the guard-heavy lineup, the lack of size, the way things aren't fully built around Caitlyn Clark, a strange pattern starts to appear. And it's not comfortable. Because it doesn't look like a team fully committing to their superstar. It looks like a team preparing for something else. Now here's the twist nobody wants to say out loud. What if the Fever aren't fully building around Caitlyn Clark anymore? Think about that. Because every championship team has one clear identity. Build around your best player. But right now, the Fever's identity feels unclear. confused, almost like they're trying to create a system where no one player dominates. And if that's true, that's the exact opposite of what Caitlin Clark needs. Because her greatness comes from having the ball, controlling the game, being the focal point. And if you take that away, you don't just limit her, you change everything. Now here's where things get even more intense, because some fans are starting to connect this to something even bigger. Not just team strategy, but league dynamics. Because let's be honest, Caitlin Clark isn't just any player. She's the biggest draw in the sport. The player bringing in record viewership, sold-out arenas, new fans to the WNBA. And when someone has that level of impact, everything around them becomes sensitive. Every decision matters more. Every move gets questioned harder. Now here's the uncomfortable question that's starting to spread. Is Caitlin Clark being held back? Now again, that's a strong claim. But when fans don't understand decisions, they start looking for deeper explanations. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. Because from their perspective, nothing about this move screams, "We're building a championship team around Caitlin." Instead, it feels like we're building something different. And that difference, it's what's scaring people. Now let's take this even further, because here's the real breaking point. What happens if this doesn't work? Because if the team struggles early, the chemistry feels off, Caitlin looks frustrated, this situation doesn't stay quiet. It explodes, because every game is already under a microscope. Every moment gets clipped. Every reaction gets analyzed. So if something feels even slightly off, the narrative we're seeing right now becomes reality. And once that happens, there's no controlling it. Now here's the part that should really make you think. Because superstars don't stay in situations that don't support them. They don't stay where the roster doesn't fit. The system limits them. The organization doesn't align with their greatness. And if Caitlin Clark ever reaches that point, everything changes. Not just for Indiana, for the entire league. Because losing a player like her, that's not just a team issue. That's a WNBA issue. Now here's the final twist that makes this even more intense. Because despite all the backlash, all the criticism, all the fear, there is still one possibility. That this works. That Raven Johnson becomes the perfect defensive piece. That she embraces her role. That she complements Caitlin instead of clashing with her. And if that happens, everything flips. The criticism disappears. The narrative changes. The Fever look like geniuses. But let's be real. That's a huge risk. Because right now, everything is stacked against that outcome. The perception, the pressure, the expectations, all of it. And once perception locks in, it's hard to break. So now we're left with one reality. This wasn't just a draft pick. This was a gamble, a massive one. Because if this works, it's a bold move that pays off. But if it doesn't, this will be remembered as the moment the Indiana Fever started losing control of everything. And trust me, what happens next? It might decide Caitlin Clark's entire future. All right, now I need you to be real with me for a second. After everything we just broke down, the draft pick, the backlash, the fit issues, the locker room tension, and what this could mean for Caitlin Clark, what do you actually think is going on here? Because this situation, it's not simple, it's not clear, and it definitely doesn't feel normal. So let's talk. Do you think this was just a bad decision by the Indiana Fever front office? A mistake that looks worse than it actually is? Or do you think this move makes zero sense and could actually hurt Caitlin Clark's development and the team's future? Or maybe there's something bigger going on behind the scenes that we're not seeing yet. Because let's be honest, the fit doesn't add up. The timing feels off. And the reaction from fans? That doesn't happen unless something feels seriously wrong. So drop your answer in the comments right now. A, it's just a bad pick. People are overreacting. B. This hurts Caitlin Clark. The fit is terrible. C. There's something bigger going on. This feels intentional, and don't just pick one. Tell me why. Because the smartest takes? Yeah, those usually turn into the next viral video. Also, if you made it this far, you already know one thing. This story is far from over. Training camp hasn't even started yet. The season hasn't begun. And the moment we see how this actually plays out on the court, everything could change again. So make sure you do this right now. Like the video if you think something about this move doesn't add up. Subscribe if you want the real breakdowns as soon as they drop. Turn on notifications, because the next update, it might show us whether this was a genius move, or the biggest mistake the Fever have made in years. Stay locked in. Because this story, yeah, it's just getting started.